Hi, this is Ohfor. Let's apply some statuses. Alright, so statuses. Following the time-honored tradition of the channel, videos come out in no particular order. It's just when I have the right story in my head, I do a video to share my experiences. I will also, as I progress with my own skills, if you will, in modding Baldur's Gate, I will revisit topics when I learn something new. And I actually had a story about Osiris that I wanted to do, but I realized that I've never really spoken about statuses before, not in detail, and it's sort of required for what I wanted to do. So here we are talking about statuses. What's a status? So if we look in shared dev, status boost, so shared dev, status data, status boost, we will see some examples of the statuses that are in the game. Now, there are two main things that apply to your character and to items and to many things in the game. One, statuses. So statuses are usually, not always, but usually meant to be some sort of temporary thing that is happening. So if we look a little bit at what we have here, we have aura of courage, paladin aura of devotion, aura of hate, etc. And we also see that for aura of courage, for instance, there's an aura of courage buff. So these are statuses, right? So the idea behind that, without going into too much detail, because I'll get to that, but you apply via a spell, or it could be, something. But in this case, you apply aura of courage on your paladin. So this status gets assigned to the paladin, the character. And then in an aura, so it's an aura of courage, and we'll see somewhere along the line here, aura radius. So in 3 meters around the paladin who has this status, something will happen. And so basically, if we look at the aura status, and again, I will cover this in more detail, but if someone is in the aura and is an ally and not tagged inanimate, so I don't exactly know of an example of an inanimate ally. Maybe someone can point something out, but so besides the point, if you're an ally in this aura radius of the paladin, you will get status aura of courage buff. So that's what the aura does in this case. And the paladin has the status, and then everybody who steps close to that paladin, who's an ally, will get aura of courage and aura of courage buff, and that will presumably boost something. Can't be frightened within X of the spellcaster, so 3 meters of the spellcaster. And then out here somewhere on the right, there will be some kind of buff or status immunity, I'm guessing. Yeah, so here, status immunity for status group frightened. Again, I will also come back to that, but just status, so SG underscore frightened. So fear, what else do we have? Intimidated, I don't know. There's various statuses that sort of relate, but they have different names. So these are organized into status groups. And this is just basically a way of saying, okay, you're immune to everything in status group frightened, whatever it may be. And that's pretty much all this aura does, I'm sure. Let's see what else we have. Yeah, there's nothing else going on. So that's the status. The paladin will apply a status, and it will run. So I think for paladins it runs forever, or until they toggle it, or something like that. So that's an example of more permanent status. We also have statuses like bless, which usually run 10 turns, I think. We have haste that runs 10 turns and then triggers something when they run out. lethargic, right? Really annoying. And then we have celestial haste, which runs 5 turns but doesn't trigger lethargic. Charm, etc. So there are many examples of statuses, and in this episode we'll be taking a closer look at what we can do with the status of our own. Right, so to investigate this, we're going to need to come up with some kind of status delivery mechanism. There's many ways you can do it. You can do it via the console, you can do it via Osiris scripting, you can do all kinds of stuff. I think it will be visually best if we just make a little spell. So let's make a shout spell. So shout spells I'll link the video. I did a video on shout spells. So essentially shout spells are like they originate from the caster and then they apply to either allies or yourself or both or enemies or whatever. We're going to make tutorial shout self. Not a particularly interesting name, but that's fine. Interesting names is not what we do here on this channel. I am going to do what the game does. It's basically based most of it of action search, but I'm not gonna parent from it directly because I don't know. I don't want a cooldown. It should just always be available because so I'll set it explicitly to none. AI flags is not gonna matter. The AI is not gonna learn our new spell. Spell properties. We'll get back to that in just a minute. Let's see, what else do we need? So target conditions, we'll do self, and icon, so I'll use generic icon underscore intent underscore buff, and then I'll disable this annoying flag. Yeah, here we go. So I use this icon a lot because I can remember it. Very important. And the second one is it's pretty generic, it's fine. I can't be bothered trying to come up with a clever icon for anything here. Now, so tooltip status apply is also not that relevant. So cast sound and tag. So the rest of action search I'm just gonna copy because why not? So it's gonna look like we're casting an action search, and I don't care. It's fine. So what else do we have? We have a spell animation. None of this is truly needed. You can have a spell that doesn't have a spell animation, then it just executes. But that's fine. Requirements no, we don't. So action search can only be thrown in combat, but that we have no such requirements here. Prepare effect, that's fine, and cast effect, that's also fine. Again, we're just copying action search because then we have something visual to look at. Sheathing, don't change. So I think this means when you have your weapon drawn, you'll keep having it drawn, and yeah, so there's probably an option for, let's see, instrument sheathed weapons. Yeah, this is fine. You know what? That's a story for a different day. It's not relevant to what we're doing here. So now we have action search copied. So this shout spell doesn't do anything whatsoever. The only purpose of it is to serve as our delivery mechanism for what we're really talking about today, which is statuses. So as we can see here, with action search, it applies status action search for 1 turn, right? So we are going to need a status. So I'll go to status data and then click the little plus and say status boost. All right, so we open that up. And we are going to make a status named status self, because we're not original here. And here I won't need a parent because there's so little we need. So tutorial status self description, a status for us. Fantastic, right? Icon, you can guess. Generic icon intent buff. And that's it. That's the minimum status we have right here. It doesn't do anything, so I was going to say there's no point to it, but that's not entirely true. When we get to the episode about Osiris, which would be the next episode I do, we'll see how applying a status can trigger something in Osiris, and you can do all kinds of funky stuff with it. But that's for next time. Right now we have our status. It's called tut status self, and then we go back. I'll just save this. And then we go back to our shout, and we do apply status tut status self, comma 100. So in previous games from Larian, this was actually a percentage chance to apply something, so it could be 50 and then would apply only 1 in 2 times, but that's not implemented for Baldur's Gate 3. I think I've mentioned this before, but I just for good measure, I'll do it again. So it just needs to be 100. Just deal with it. That's how it is. And then we do 2 turns, so we get a little bit of time. And then there was a tutorial status apply somewhere. Let's see if we can find that. Yeah, so not tutorial status apply, tooltip status apply, and I'll do. Oh, yeah, that's no good. So I'll steal this one, and then we'll do tut underscore status self 100 comma. I'll leave it at 1 actually. So because that will, so just be aware that this should be true, that the tooltip should show the same thing that is actually going to happen. But I'm leaving it at 1 so we can see the tooltip, and we know that it's our tooltip, and we know how things connect. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And with that, our spell is complete. I will get rid of action search here because we no longer need that. And then I will save. And then we need to get in game and get this unlocked. So I'll just copy that. So tut shout self. And we go in game. Oh, we have Shadowheart with us this morning. Hello, Shadowheart. And we are going to add debug spell. And then it's a shout spell, so we need to prefix with that. And then shout tut shout self. Let's add that, and here we go. We now have, did we not set a, was I really, so it's not showing a name or anything? That's probably on me. Let's hang on, let's just yeah. Okay, I did not set a display name or description. That's a little bit shaky. So tutorial shout self and scream at the wall. Because whatever, you're just shouting. And there we go. So we save that, and then we go back. Hello, Shadowheart again. Let's see if we have a little bit more of a spell description going on. Yes, tutorial shout self, scream at the wall. So we cast that. Let me just get rid of the volume here. So we cast that, boof, and nothing happened, or at least nothing visibly happened. So let's take a look at what's going on, because I'm fairly sure the status did apply, but I have difficulty proving that to you or to myself even, because we can't see it. Oh, will you look at that? This is no good. There's 2 parentheses. There we go. That should make a big difference. And we save that. And then we go into combat. No, we go into game, sorry. And hello, Shadowheart. Let's try this one more time. There we go. Tutorial status self. It now applies the status, and we can see a little counter here for 2 turns. A status for us. And if we hover over, you can see here that it says it's going to apply tutorial status self for 1 turn, while in reality it's 2 turns. So this was the tooltip status apply. So it sort of shows that the tooltip generation code is smart enough to see, oh, you're applying a status, it has this little icon, the status, and for one turn, except it's not, it's 2 turns, but it's not smarter than what we tell it. So let's go to our tooltip and just fix that, because now I have shown how that works and how that is wired up. So we set it to 2, which would be correct. Okay, so the shout applies a status to ourselves, and now we can actually get to the meat and potatoes of this episode and look at what we can do with that status. So let's go take a look. Now, I don't know what, as we saw, I mean, if we look here, there are many columns. I don't know what all of them does. So some of them I simply consider out of scope for this episode, which would be sound and effects and so on and so forth, because that's too much to take on in one episode. And then others I do know what do, and I will cover that. And then there's going to be some in between where I simply don't know what they do, or they're not in use in the game. Because one of the reasons I don't know what they do is that I looked in game and I couldn't find any use in any of the existing code. So that makes it really hard. I mean, we can start speculating, but it's not really the point. Suffice it to say, you can get very far with just what I know here and what I'm going to show you. So we'll leave it at that. Now, the first one that comes up here is, so we're in the status. And so owner we don't care about. Display name, description parameters, well, we will leave that. An icon, that's all fine. Format color is an interesting one. So let's do, why don't we do pink? Because why not? And so we save that. And what this does is it will change the color of the overhead text we see when the status applies to Shadowheart. And as we all know, Shadowheart is the type of girl who really loves pink. Not. Anyway, here we go. Now the status is shown in pink. If you can call that pink, but as we talked about before, I know only 3 or 4 color names on a good day. So that's essentially it. Notice something else happening here, by the way. Notice how the status just keeps stacking up. There's more and more of them as I cast them. We'll get back to that. This is not always what you want. But anyway, so this is format color. If we leave it blank, it's just going to be white. And speaking of weird color names, what is BlackRock? What is Story? Hang on, I'm just curious. I haven't actually played around with this a lot. I just know what it does. Let's set the color to story item. And let's see what that actually does. And then today we will learn what color story item is. So apparently it's a deep kind of purple. Whatever. Okay, so enough about that. It's not really that interesting. I just wanted, since we're going through it. Now status, okay, hang on. Let me scroll a bit. Status effect override for items and status effect override. So when applying a status, there is a sort of mechanical part to it. So a status can make you immune to fear, or it can deal damage every turn, like a poison is a status, or it can heal you every turn, etc. So that's one aspect, the sort of mechanical, this is what happens with your game stats and attributes and so on. And another thing that statuses are used for is to apply visual effects on when a status applies. So for instance, if you dip your weapon in fire, then for as long as that dip is in effect, I don't know how long it runs, but it's besides the point, you will have a flame kind of effect on your weapon. And then if you wanted to, you could say, well, when this status is applied, you can override the effect on the item. So if the weapon then gets, I don't know, infused with magic, then it becomes a hellfire effect instead of a normal fire effect or whatever. So this applies both to people. So Karlak, for instance, when she does her rage thing, she turns on fire, I think, when she eats a soul coin. but then you could apply a status to her and then override that effect. I don't really think it's beneficial to set up a full example for this, because if we do that for every column, then it's going to be a very long video. So let's move on. Material type and material. Anything with material. Let's just be real quick about this. I have no idea. I haven't looked at material and material imports and meshes and models and animations. If you want any of that, you're gonna have to wait for me to catch up. I might get to that at some point, but I'm not there yet. I simply don't know how this works. So what else do we have? Use lying picking state. That's going to be another hard pass. I don't know. Sound vocals, sound starts, sound loops, etc. I know what they are, but there's no reason to go into it. We can select some sounds that will run while the buff. Actually, let's just try that. Sound, vocal loop, laughter. I'm curious. This is really not my field either. We can't really work with sounds in the toolkit. So it's not something I've explored a lot. However, I am curious. Okay. So now we hear laughter. I don't know if you can hear it. Actually, I'll boost the volume a bit. All right. So, but this should really come as no surprise that sound, vocal start, vocal loop, sound start, all of these things have to do with sound. I won't really go deeper with that. Immune flag. So apparently, a status, you can set an immune flag. So slipping immunity, unbreakable, unrepairable. So I don't know if I mentioned this. Statuses can apply to yourself and your teammates and your enemies, but also to inanimate objects in the world, which is why stuff like unrepairable, unstorable, grounded, floating, inventory bound, all of these things make sense. Not really, for most of the statuses we do, but certainly if you have an item that you want to make sure stays in your inventory, kind of like what's it called again? The item Shadowheart has through the game. It's inventory bound. You can't get rid of it. It's just always going to come back. Pickpocketable when equipped, thrown immunity, invisibility immunity, backstab, etc. Lots of flags here. For this, I would definitely recommend you just go through the game. As I always recommend, go through the game, find something that makes sense for you. Find something that relates to what you want to do and see what these flags do. Now on apply conditions, so this is where, on apply conditions, that would be another opportunity to set something like a saving throw or whatever. Then there's stack ID, and stack ID is important. So if we remember back what was going on here, then I was able to cast this multiple times, and it would just keep adding more and more copies of this status. This is where stack ID comes into play. So if I set a stack ID of tutorial self, then the game will know that when this status is applied, it should go into a stack called tutorial self. And let's just see what that does right off the bat without doing anything else. So we just wait for the statuses to expire, and then we do some quick casts again. And you will notice that now the status just stays. So it resets the timer for 2 turns when you cast it, but you don't get multiple stacks of it. Okay? Most of the time this is what you want. Not always, but most of the time. We have a stack type here, where we can say override, deactivate, variable. Variable? That I don't know, but additive is interesting. So let's set it to that. And then back in game, we can apply it. We can apply it again. We can apply it a couple of times. And notice now we have 7 turns. So it basically keeps adding the number of turns on top of the stack that is running. And it can go as high as we want. Okay, so now 12 turns, 11, and it will slowly tick down. So that's what additive does. And then override, I think, was the default behavior when we set it. So override will basically say whatever is running, I don't know how many you have running, but I'm going to override it when I apply the status. So back in game, we have 10 turns remaining. Oof, now 2 turns. Now we're back. So the old stack gets wiped and the new one gets applied. Okay, priority, I don't fully know. If you have multiple spells casting the same status or on the same stack ID, then one will win over the other based on priority. That's how I interpret it. I honestly don't know a lot more than that. I've never had to deal with this. Go look in game if you need to. Okay, so moving on, aura radius. So that was what we saw in the very beginning with the paladin buff. So I'll go 9 meters. So in 9 meters around me, I can apply another status. I don't have another status to apply, but let's very quickly do one. And that should be enough, actually. So now we can go back here, aura statuses, toot, status aura, and then nothing else required here. Let's see, can we find some kind of aura effect? Aura buff status effect, yeah. Aura of terror buff status effect, yeah, why not? Okay, so now in a 9 meter radius we have an aura that will hand out this status. So if we go back, so we don't see the visual effects, the aura of hate, but more importantly, do we see this status get applied? So I'm going to do cc add start new, sorry. We're going to add in a tab. There we go. So now we have tab and we have shadow heart. And let's cast it. Okay, so something is clearly wrong with our aura because it's not applying to tab, and it should. Let's just see. Oh, so it's not just a aura statuses, it's actually a full command we do here. Okay, so that's a little bit misleading, but fear not, we will cover it. So we go back here, and then we don't really care if it's an ally or whatever at this stage of the tutorial. We'll just basically do that. Apply status. And notice how we don't set a duration or anything else here, because this basically implies that as long as you're in the aura, you will get the status. So it doesn't really make sense to indicate number of turns or anything like that. So now we go back. See, tutorial status aura was applied. And we can cast it again. We see that tab and the dream visitor are hit with tutorial status aura, and if I move out of, oh hang on, I just need the status applying again. So now they have it, and we move out of range, and we see the aura going away. So that's essentially it. Okay, so that's the aura. I can't tell you why. So when it comes to aura effects, it's tied into how the effect is set up and all kinds of stuff. So I don't. Maybe let's just see. No. Okay, this is not worth our time right now because this video is not about effects. Leave action, die action. So this is what happens when you leave the zone when the aura is in. If anything specific needs to happen, you could create a big fireball explosion if you want to. And then there's also die action, which is, unsurprisingly, what happens if you die when you have this status applied. So yeah, I won't really go deeper with that. Force stack override. It's going to be a yes or no. I don't know. I mean, so it's self-explanatory. So it forces the stack to override regardless of whatever else is in play. I don't know exactly where this makes sense. Maybe somebody can think of a good example. So toggle. Let's just try that. So we save that. It's a little bit. It doesn't really make sense for a status that runs only 2 turns. But if you had a status that runs indefinitely, which is something I do want to cover in this video, then it makes sense to have it something that you can toggle. So let's cast it, and then passives. Okay, so now it runs for 2 turns, and now it disables. Now it runs for 2 turns, now it disables. Okay, so that's what the toggle does, yeah. So it's with the passive that you get a little UI for it. So use toggle if there's something you turn on and off. Now that would make sense if it was a status that ran until long rest or whatever, that you could disable it again. Okay, so now we're getting to the good stuff. I mean, the other stuff is important as well, but this is definitely one of the key things. So a status has a tick. When should it apply certain effects? If it's doing something to you or for you, then how often should it refresh? And if we say start at turn, or start of round, end turn, end of round. I guess these are self-explanatory. So start of turn, and then boost temporary HP by 10. Okay, so every time your turn starts in combat, you get a boost of 10 temporary HP. And now the status has expired. So it's a little bit short in duration for our purposes here. But nevertheless, it does work. So every turn, do something. Now, adding temporary hit points like that is not necessarily, I don't know how much sense that makes, but that's basically what the tick type is. Passives is exactly what the title says. You can apply a number of passives that are active. So what will happen is that you will have these passives when you have the status on you, and as soon as the status goes away, the passive goes away. Simple as that. And passives can be, I don't know, anything really. So you could temporarily have, let's see if we can find a good one. Alert, for instance, which is basically defeat. It also, the feat applies a passive. My last video was on feats, so you know this already. And so now if we go in game, and let's take a look at, so Shadowheart has initiative +1 right now. Then we cast it, and now she has initiative +6. So she has essentially alert active, and then it goes away when the status goes away. So that's how that works. It's really very simple. So here, more tooltip stuff. Tick functors is much more interesting. So the tick was at the start of turn. I believe that is start of turn. Then tick functors is something else you can execute every time it ticks. So this could be apply another status, do some damage, do some healing, whatever. So I don't really know why I would do it here and not. Well, actually, yeah. So there could be cases for it. I'm sorry for weaving a bit, but it's sort of like it's a little bit complicated to get into the whole when to do what. So tick functors. Let's see. What did you just do? I hate it when the UI does this. So tick functors. The gaze, so I think you meet those outside the crash. I think it's those you meet. They create a surface thinking cloud around them. Every turn that cloud gets regenerated when they move about, when they have this status. Okay? So basically that's something you could do. You could also have a healing aura around you. The shadow cursed vines, every time they tick, they deal you 1d4 necrotic damage. A burning surface would also do the same, or maybe it's 1d6, I don't know. Regain hit points 46. That's not overpowered at all. Let's put that in there. So tick functors, regain hit points 46. So this is all fine and well to heal at the start of every turn 46, but it of course only applies if you have the status active. So now I have the status active. Let's see if we take some damage. Yep, took 6 damage. And boof, healed 13. So we covered tick functors, apply functors, remove functors, same kind of thing. On apply roll, on apply success, on apply fail. So on apply roll is where you can do like a not saving throw, wisdom, DC 15 or whatever. If it's a hostile status you're throwing at people, at enemies, right? You would have an on apply roll. And then on apply success, so you would not unconditionally set the status in the aura here. You would instead have an on apply roll to allow targets to have a saving throw, and then on apply fail. This is a little bit interesting because what happens since you're not doing an attack directly. You need something to happen when you fail. So if you try and throw an AoE fear at people and they succeed in their saving throw, then something needs to happen, right? And what the game is usually set up to do is that when you hit enemies with it, it forces them into a combat state. They basically get pissed off at you for trying to fear them or whatever, charm them, or so it's seen as a hostile action, and that's what this column can do. There's other things as well. If you get hit by a fireball, no, that's not a status. That's a bad example. Never mind. We just disregard that. The same time, since we added on tick roll, on tick success, on tick fail. So if you have a fear status or a charmed status, then every turn you can roll a saving throw, and if you succeed in that, then you would here have remove status, whatever, charmed. On fail, you remain charmed. On remove roll, on remove fail. So all of these are just variations, and I think the titles of the columns pretty much gives it away. On tick is something that happens automatically when it ticks. On remove is when you try and forcibly remove a hostile status from you. LED effect. Interesting. A story for a different day, perhaps. But there's probably a little bit of something going on. I don't know what LED is actually short for in this sense. More importantly, here's the status group. So at the beginning I said there was like different groups for feared and invisible and charmed and blinded. These are the ones you should usually test against, because they can have many different individual names. So blinded, you could be perma-blinded, you could be in magical darkness, you could, and so on and so forth. So you just test against the status group, and this is also where you can see or define that your status is part of one of these status groups, if it makes sense. Depends a little bit on what you're doing, of course, or you can specifically say you're not part of any. Is unique. So the tooltip text is gonna, whether or not the status is unique in the sense that only one instance can exist per caster. Casting another instance by the same caster will destroy the previous one. So it doesn't make sense for an aura. But if you cast the status, so I guess we're back to the sanctuary discussion. If you cast sanctuary on one person and you later then cast it on another, then it's going to remove the status from the first one. I guess it's also the same with haste, and that brings us into the territory of concentration spells, but that's again a little bit out of scope. Now out here there's going to be a lot of columns that have to do with effects. I won't be covering that this video, simple as that. And I think that's it, right? And I do apologize for a few of them where I'm like a little bit shady on what's going on. This is the nature of modding. I've always been able to, when I wanted to do something specific, I've always been able to find something that does almost what I want in game, and then I just basically learn from that, and that's what you're going to need to do as well. But this is essentially a status, and it applies an aura, and of course in an aura that can be positive or negative. So I didn't really make any decisions on that here. It just applies to everyone in the aura unconditionally. And then you could do like tick type. Every tick you take 1d4 damage or whatever it may be. You start combining or everything you know, and then eventually the status goes away. There is just one thing I will cover, and that is if we apply the status for -1 turns. -1 is in-game speak for until long rest. We do the same on the tooltip. Then the status will stay with you until you long rest. Let's try that first. Hello, Sherhard. Then we apply the status, and we see the status just basically says until long rest. And that's also what the tooltip says. However, you can even extend that. If you want it to persist beyond long rest, let me fast forward until I find this column. Here we go. Status property flags. So there is a flag that is relevant for this, ignore resting. So if you set this flag, resting simply won't affect it. So even though you set it to -1, which is until long rest, then it's going to stay with you even through a long rest. Okay, so that's one flag you need to be aware of. Now, if you go and die and then somebody resurrects you, this status will be gone. And there's a few statuses in game you gain that work like this, and it's really annoying. What's it called? Loma's Blessing or whatever. And the way to have a status stick with you even after being killed and resurrected is apply to death. So if you set ignore resting and apply to that, that status is going to be with you until somebody takes it off, either by you toggling it off, like we saw with the toggle effect, or something else removes that status from you, or it gets overridden via the stack ID. Okay, but otherwise it's just going to stay, and this is what you want. If you want a status that stays with you forever, well, forever, then that's what you do. However, I will also say this: do consider, if you really need this, maybe a passive is what you should be doing instead, because a passive can do many of the same things as status can, and maybe that's the right choice. But that's on a case-by-case basis. And with that, I think I have babbled more than long enough about statuses and how they sort of connect. So take what you've learned here, go investigate the game, and have fun modding.